of our heads, outside of our gadgets. When I'm birding, I am just happily lost in observing what's happening around me. And that is such a gift. I hope some of you will experience birds in that way or in whatever way you like. I'll also say before we get on to the birds that uh, you know, it's important to me personally and to New York City Bird Alliance that everybody feel welcome in nature and in our community of bird loving and bird caring people. Birding and nature are belong to everybody, and we all belong to birds. So welcome wherever you're from, whatever your story is. We're happy to have you here, and I hope you'll come out and bird with us. Um, okay, before we lead this slide, I'll just point out one other thing. He stepped on my line. The tufted titmouse is there singing with a chickadee chattering in the background. The cardinal is singing, and interestingly, which is not always the case, both female and male cardinals sing. It's also a blue-gray gnatcatcher in the background. And the blue jay is calling. This, of course, as we'll talk about, is another amazing way that birds connect us to the world around us, right, to the universe around us that we often walk right by without noticing. Okay, so intro to birding tonight in a nutshell. Uh, we are going to talk a little bit about New York City Bird Alliance, what we do to protect birds and connect people to birds. We're going to talk some more about why birds are so fabulous. We're going to talk about why New York City is so great for birds. We're going to talk about what a bird is. What is a bird? They're all around us, but what exactly are they and where did they come from? We're going to get to the meat of the matter of figuring out which bird is which I realize is a difficult task, one that I still struggle with and will struggle with at times for the rest of my life. And we're going to talk about how to get birding, what we need to go birding. Well, really, we don't need anything, I should say. We can just enjoy walking in a park and seeing birds, but there's some tools that can be helpful. And we'll talk about how you can connect to the birding community in New York City. Okay. Um, New York City Bird Alliance, we are an organization that's been around for 4.5 decades, protecting birds in New York City. We also connect people to birds in New York City, but all in to serve the mission of protecting birds, which as we'll talk about, need our protection. We have been around for, as I mentioned, quite a long time. We're a part of the National Audubon Society. And we have a growing staff and a big community of people who are invested in learning about birds, loving birds, protecting birds. We work through science initiatives. Along with doing a lot of teaching about birds, also work as a bird surveyor with the organization, do a lot of bird surveys as part of our research programs. We have lead outings rather across the city, connecting people to birds in all 5 boroughs, most of them free. And we work on passing legislation that will make New York City a safer place for birds all year round. In terms of the main focuses of our work, we work to make the city safer, primarily through making windows in the city bird friendly, making them visible to birds through a treatment like you can see in the back of this Junco. That looks like snow, but it's actually little dots on a window. And through reducing lighting in the city, which we're working on right now, working on passing legislation to reduce nighttime lighting that attracts birds to the city. We work on creating and enhancing green spaces all across the city in all sorts of crazy spaces. This is the Javits Center in Manhattan, where there's a colony of about 200 herring gulls nesting, believe it or not. And we work specifically to protect water birds. That's based in our over 40-year old harbor herons nesting survey program, which I led for a number of years and am very closely involved with. Uh, a lot of wading birds nest right here in wild islands in New York City, as well as birds that nest on beaches and marshes, and we work to protect those birds as they're particularly vulnerable today. Okay, so these are just a quick review of things we do to protect birds. I know a lot of you are probably already connected to this work, and I hope that as you get to know birds better, and you'll be inspired to protect them. Right? We really the basic goal of my organization is to get people to love birds and want to protect them, and also to fight directly to protect birds. So. Um, uh, uh, we'll get back to start the love of birds. Um, I love this slide. It again shows some of the interesting juxtapositions of birds that make them so I think fascinating. These are ducks. Some of you might recognize there are two species of duck in this photo. We have mallards in the center. That's one of the most common duck species around the world. The female above and the male below. And then we have a bird you might not be as familiar with, the northern pintail, a beautiful migratory duck that stops through New York City and sometimes spends the winter. This photo captures something else that's really interesting about birds is that a duck, right? A duck waddling around a little park pond, it doesn't get sort of more comical or seemingly helpless in a way than that little duck by a pond, right? They seem so sweet to us. In some ways defenseless if they can't fly away from you. On the other hand, these are birds that are flying over the mountains of Alaska during migration. They're flying hundreds of miles during migration at altitudes and temperatures where a person couldn't survive. Birds are incredibly resilient creatures that have been around for millions of years, far longer than people have been on Earth. I think I always find that inspiring and moving to have these ancient creatures right around us. Um, of course, they are also doing something here that I think people have been inspired by as long as people have been able to be inspired, right, by the flight of birds. Birds do this achieve this effortless takeoff into the air, and I think we've all dreamt of that in our lives. I think it's just it kind of never gets old. Um, this bird, and again, this is the why are birds so fabulous section, just to orient you. This bird is the Arctic tern. This is considered one of the heroes of bird migration. This bird migrates 43,000 miles round trip from Greenland to Antarctica and back every year, following a sort of extemporized zigzaggy trip looking for food. And many of the birds that we see in New York City, most of them, in fact, achieve this kind of migration flight. Amazing for many of them, such tiny creatures. Birds, of course, are beautiful, come in amazing colors, like these finches here and bunting at a feeder, and in amazing patterns that just seem incredibly designed, right? This harlequin duck is a bird, like all the birds that we're going to see pretty much in this presentation tonight, as a bird that we can see in New York City if we go to the right place at the right time. Um, Birds come in subtler but still beautiful suits, like this often a crowd favorite, the cedar waxwing, named for the beautiful little band color on its wings, and as well that beautiful band on its tail. And of course, birds do something else that I've mentioned. I I swear I've shown this slide 100 times or more, and I still laugh every time that song sparrow sings. There's something that's so sort of Muppetish and also bizarre about the way it moves its head when it sings, right? That's not a person, it's a different sort of creature. It's evolved to do something different than a person does. That little song sparrow, aptly named. Okay, some of you might know the term spark bird. Spark bird refers to the bird that sparks your interest in birds, gets you excited about birds, and leads you into the never-ending obsession of bird watching. Though you don't have to go that far. You can go as far as you like. Um, uh, I have cheating maybe. I have an honorary spark bird. You know who this is? By the sound. This is a hummingbird. I've been obsessed with hummingbirds my whole life. I love them to death. And though I saw them a little later in my life before I became obsessed with birds, I they deserve a place here. My actual spark bird, though, is a different bird that that's the ruby-throated hummingbird, is this bird. When I was about 5 years old, we had a bird feeder in front of our kitchen window, which was such a gift, an amazing way to see birds up close. We had a um, something set up so the birds could tell it was a window, so it wasn't dangerous for them. Um, and I had, by that time, by 5 years old, I already knew kind of the common birds that came to the feeder, the chickadee, the cardinal, um, the downy woodpecker. And one winter, one day, all of a sudden, this flock of crazy, beautiful, bullying birds descended on our feeder from nowhere. They turned out to be evening grosbeaks. This is a northern species that occasionally comes south when we're really lucky, in search of food in the wintertime. And I've always remembered that visit by evening grosbeaks to our kitchen window feeder. And they're only there for a day or two, but I've had dreams my whole life imagining all sorts of birds flying by that kitchen window, toucans and flamingos and cockatoos, all kinds of birds, and I think all based in that just like startling experience of suddenly seeing these strangers appear and disappear. And that gets to a lot of the fun of birding is you just never know what's going to happen. It's such an adventure, and you get to know kind of new friends along the way. I should give a proviso that I'm super corny when I talk about birds, so you'll have to excuse me. You may have already noticed that. But to me, the place of watching birds is a place of love, really, is a place of loving nature, loving birds, enjoying nature and birds with other people. I just think not a lot of things are better than that. It's so relaxing and fun, and no reason not to just let yourself enjoy it and enjoy it with other people. Okay, so you're here for Intro to Birding in New York City. Why, of all the crazy places, would New York City be the place where you would think you could come watch birds, right? People who are not from New York City, as I did before I moved here 30 years ago, thought, oh, New York City, that's ridiculous. I know birds from, I grew up in the woods and on a little farm in Pennsylvania, tiny little farm. And I didn't understand why New York City would be a place anyone would think to look for birds. A lot of people who have lived in New York City their whole lives have this attitude, and it's something that my organization is working to change. A lot of people who live in the city think of birds, and they think of at least one, possibly three species. Maybe you can think of what those species might be. They're recognizable to us even from a glimpse here in its natural habitat. That's a really low blow at the rock pigeon. I love pigeons. I'm becoming more obsessed with them, strangely, as I get older. They don't live in sewers, but we recognize that bird, right? We know it very well. Um, this bird, the house sparrow, and this bird, the European starling. I just gave away question, the answer to my next question, which was how are these birds connected? The name of the third bird reveals it. These birds are all birds that don't naturally live here. These are species that people brought from Eurasia to the Americas when Europeans first arrived in this hemisphere. So they are birds that have lived with people for thousands of years. They They have our number. They know how to survive with us. They're super scrappy. Um, and though several of these species, particularly the lower two, can be a problem as invasive species for native species, I still think of them as brave characters that are here of no fault of their own, and beautiful and interesting, have interesting stories in ecology. However, while I do love these birds, despite their ubiquity and some of the problems they cause. The thing is that there are lots of birds in New York City beyond these three species, as most of you, I think, already know. Nearly 500 species have been recorded in New York City. That's a lot of bird species. Nearly 300 in Central Park alone. And about 200 of those species are birds that you might see every year. If you're determined, as many birders are in New York City, you can see quite a few more species in a year than that. People, there are some obsessed bird watchers out there. Just be aware. And you are welcome to join us. I can't say I'm the most obsessed, but I'm pretty obsessed. But you're also welcome to just enjoy birds in whatever way suits you. Um, okay, so so we've established, right, there are a lot of birds here in an odd place for birds to be, it would seem. Why New York City? I love this photo. I imagine this pigeon sitting atop a building saying, "Why New York City?" Right? Pigeons are so put upon. They're so aggrieved, right? They get so much shade from people. They haven't done anything to deserve it. In fact, pigeons have amazing history, right, of all sorts. I don't really have time to go into it tonight, but a lot of you probably know pigeons have been awarded medals of honor in both world wars. They're incredible navigators, incredible birds. But I digress. Why New York City? Why is New York City so great for birds? And if we pull out a little bit to look at New York City from a distance, we can maybe understand that when birds migrate or move from normally north to south, uh, north in the spring to take advantage of the warm weather, and then and food, and then south again in the fall. We're just coming into south migration, um, fall migration. Birds come along the East Coast and along the Eastern Flyway, a big sort of highway in the sky of birds migrating. And they follow along the coast, get sort of scrunched as they come down, and the coast comes further west. And when they get here, you can see there's a lot of green, great habitat. And then when they get to New York City, suddenly there's this big blotch of gray, right? There's a lot of cement and glass, unfortunately. Um, and within that, happily, are these green oases of New York City's parks. So these birds, many of which, most songbirds particularly, migrate at night. When they've migrated all night, they're exhausted, they're hungry, they need water. At dawn, when they're looking for a place to land, they come to New York City, they see these green squares that are squares or rectangles and triangles in all shapes in all five boroughs of the city that provide these amazing shelters for them. And they funnel into our parks, and that provides this amazing concentrated birding that New York City is actually famous for across the world. Birders come from all over the world, believe it or not, to bird watch right here in New York City during spring and fall migration, because our parks have these like unnatural in a way concentrations of birds, the kind of concentrations of birds I dreamt of as a slightly strange young teenager getting into birds. Um, so uh, New York City is a really great place to go bird watching. We have all, as I've seen, many kinds of birds here, such a variety of species. This is just a taste of the species that you can see in New York City in a year. And I would say all of these birds are pretty easy to see if you go to the right place at the right time. Maybe the exception is the great horned owl up here at the upper left. You have to really look for that bird, but they're around. They breed in the city. New York City provides amazing habitat for birds, partly also because New York City has historically been an amazing, this area is an amazingly rich estuary for all kinds of wildlife, and it is recovering now after many decades of mistreatment. Okay, so um, we've established a little bit why birds like New York City. Let's talk a little bit about what a bird is, right? We're talking a lot about birds, but what is it? What is it? What exactly is a bird? Here, I want to refer you to the chat. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what makes a bird different than other creatures. In other words, what do birds have in common that separates them from other kinds of animals? And please don't be shy here. There's no wrong answer. Um, and I'd love to. I know a lot of you probably already know quite a bit about birds and what makes them different. Good, we have someone coming in strong. About the history of birds that we're going to talk about. Right, birds have feathers. That is one of the things that is unique to birds yeah, among living creatures today. And of course, birds have wings that, like some other creatures, but they're particularly notable winged creatures. Um, Exactly. As Marina said, some other creatures like insects or bats also fly. Emily, right? Birds lay eggs, right? Unlike many other creatures, there are some other creatures such as reptiles and insects that also lay eggs, but certainly laying external eggs is something that people generally don't do. Um, um, yes, good. So, right, Valetti says that their mouths are different, right? Birds have beaks, right? Beaks, kind of these hard things made of the same material as our fingernails that help us eat. Oh, and great. Yeah, Kim mentions that they have hollow bones. There are a bunch of adaptations that are unique to birds that are all about being light, being able to fly, right? So, great. Um, there are some characteristics that some of you have hit upon that birds share with other creatures, right? But that we still think of when we think about birds. Birds are like people, vertebrates. They have a spinal column. They're warm-blooded, meaning that they can maintain their body temperature in diverse external temperatures. They have 2 feet, like a person. Um, but unlike a person, they lay external eggs. Um, they have wings that help them fly, like a few other kinds of creatures. They have beaks. Maybe turtles or platypi have beaks. And birds sing. People sing. Apparently, mice sing in tiny supersonic voices. I love picturing that. Um, so those are some things that birds share with other creatures but that we still associate with them. And then, as a number of you hit upon, birds have a bunch of characteristics that are particularly focused on enabling them flight, right? Birds have feathers, extremely light but strong structures that give them lift and also give them warmth. Um, Birds have certain skeletal adaptations, like the furcula or the wishbone, right? That they sometimes fight over with a turkey. The wishbone is a flexible structure um, formed from what would be the bird's clavicles, right? That actually stores energy on the bird's downstroke to help them lift their wings again. So it helps them through a mechanical kind of spring in their body to fly. It also is part of a structure that protects all their internal organs from the very demanding exercise of flying, of flapping, just nonstop flapping. Some birds practically all year long. And then birds have, as Kim mentioned, several adaptations that are really interesting and make them light. Birds have hollow bones, very strong bones, but hollow that make them much lighter than other creatures their size. And part of that structure is the respiratory system that's actually partly inside their bones. Birds have air sacs that are part of their lung system that store air so that basically when a bird flies or does anything that it does, it is able to process oxygen all of the time. When people breathe, we breathe in, we have some oxygen. On the out breath, we have to wait. right? We're kind of holding our breath until we get the next breath. When birds breathe out, they have oxygenated air stored in air sacs, including inside their lungs, that then floods their lungs um, during the out breath, so that they're constantly processing oxygen. And that allows them to be these just incredible athletes that can achieve, just practically year-round movement. Um, okay, great. So, uh, a little, this is all such a whirlwind. I hope this will just be kind of inspiring and inspire you to learn more. A little bit about what makes birds unique. Where do birds come from? Um, I love this photo of a pair of osprey on a nest in Jamaica Bay, kind of rising out of the primordial mist. Of course, we know that birds throughout history have served many important purposes in human society, from air travel to entertainment to communication. Hopefully, some of you in this webinar are old enough to recognize the Flintstones. I love these cartoons. But the point of them really is to raise an interesting kind of time question, right? In the Flintstones, um, we had the Flintstone family along with Dino the dinosaur. And we also had, I don't remember you remember this very chatty bird. I remember that he kind of annoyed me as a child when I watched the Flintstones. He was just always talking. But in the Flintstones, Fred and Dino and this chatty bird coexist, right? We know that in reality, dinosaurs like Dino were vanished from the earth long before anything like a person was on the face of the earth, right? People are very young compared to dinosaurs, which vanished from the earth about 66 million years ago. People in our current form have really just been around for, at most, really just a few 100,000 years, but maybe a million years, but a fragment of the time that since dinosaurs disappeared. Um, this chatty bird, though, that's a different story. The chatty bird on Dino's tail is as old as the dinosaurs, and that's what, right? David in the chat already got to this point, right? And I'm sure a lot of you know this, though it's really fairly recent knowledge, right? It's something that we've learned only in recent decades and confirmed. We now understand, a lot of you probably know one or more of the Jurassic Park movies. The Velociraptor is the fierce predator shown in those movies that hunts people in packs. And we now know, you can see in this photo that this is not quite the aspect of the Velociraptor we see in the Jurassic Park movies, right? Jurassic Park movies, their raptors are smooth. This guy has, what does he have, right? He has feathers. And we now know from the fossil record that dinosaurs like the Velociraptor, that were part of the theropod dinosaur group, um, had feathers, just as birds have feathers today. And that has further research has led to the conclusion that birds, in fact, are considered dinosaurs. Birds coexisted with the animals we think of as dinosaurs. They've been around for an incredibly long time, though they've certainly evolved since the time the rest of their dinosaur relatives went extinct. Um, but we're surrounded every day by the last remaining lineage of dinosaurs on Earth, the only ones to survive the extinction of all the rest. And that's something that just never ceases to amaze me. Um, uh, it's a good reminder of even that pigeon on the sidewalk. They're an ancient creature. Since the time of the dinosaurs, right? Birds have branched out into incredible diversity. One of the most successful groups of creatures on Earth. There are about 10,000 species of birds worldwide, from the tiny hummingbird you see there to the gigantic ostrich to all sorts of shapes and sizes in between. There are about 2,000 species in North America. I should say that if you talk to uh, taxonomists, the people who decide which bird species is a distinct species from another, they're a really quarrelsome group. They can never make up their minds how many species there are. So some taxonomists might say there are a lot more bird species. Some people might say there are fewer, but there are a lot regardless. Um, okay. So talked a little bit about what birds are, about where they came from. Let's get to the meat or matter of which bird is which. And as we start talking about that, I want to introduce you to just a little sense of what a bird looks like, right? And what you might be thinking about as you're seeing a strange bird and trying to figure out what the heck it is, right? You do not need to memorize any of these terms. This slide really is just talk a little bit about the parts of a bird. We know human parts very well, right? And bird parts are similar but different, right? And when you're trying to figure out what bird you're seeing, often people really focus first on the head of a bird, right? There's a lot to learn from looking at the bill or the beak of a bird. Bill and beak, by the way, are interchangeable terms. They mean the same thing. Um, Ornithologists tend to use the word bill, but beak is it's a beak. Um, you might look at the not only the shape of the head but the pattern of the head. Does the bird have a supercilium or an eyebrow stripe? Right, a supercilious person raises their eyebrow at you, right? An eyebrow stripe. It might have an eye line that goes partway through the eye, as in this bird. It might go all the way through the eye. It might have an eye ring that you can see a little bit on this sparrow. The breast might be a different color than the flanks, might be a different color than the undertail coverts. Um, Coverts are little feathers that cover the flight and tail feathers. The wing coverts, these series of coverts, are little feathers that protect the base of the flight feathers. These longer feathers that expand in like a fan when a bird flies, and those are split into three groups: the primaries, the longest feathers, the secondaries, and the tertials. Um, when a bird expands its wings to fly, right, you get a whole different view, right? And you can see here, right, of course, those wing feathers, they fold so elegantly into a protected little bundle by the bird's side, but then become this amazing tool to lift into the air. The coverts might expand into a larger patch of feathers. When the bird is perched, we call any marks on those feathers a wing bar. But when the wing expands, you might see even more colors. You might see also a different color on the underwing than the overwing. You might see a different colored rump or butt of the bird. Um, as you get to know birds, again, this is nothing you need to memorize, but you're going to get to know these parts of the bird so that when you're looking at a strange bird, you immediately say, "Oh, okay, what shape beak is it? What kind of beak does it have? Or does it have an eyebrow stripe? Does it have an eye ring? Does it have a wing bar?" There's certain things that you'll learn to just kind of focus on, and that immediately can narrow down what you're seeing. Let's look at an actual bird. This is a northern mockingbird, a very common bird in New York City. I don't know if any of you had them nesting on your fire escapes or terraces. They could be pretty territorial and dive bomb you during nesting season. Um, this is a northern mockingbird perched. You can see that it has a few little white wing bars, also a little white stripe along the tail when perched. When in flight, suddenly that expands into big patches of color. A lot of birds have white patches in their tail or wings, and we think that's maybe partly a way to alert other birds that maybe there's something going on, to be alert to danger. It also might be a way to distract a predator. You don't A bird like the mockingbird doesn't want a hawk going after its body, right? It doesn't want it going after its head or its core. if a bird goes for the tail or the wing, right, a predator does, the mockingbird might lose a few feathers, but it's hard for the bird to get a grip there. So we think that also may be the reason that a lot of birds have interesting patches, distracting kind of patches in their wings and tails. Okay, so that's just a quick glimpse of talking a little bit about bird anatomy. Let's talk about when you're in the field, when you're in a park. I don't mean to use such a technical term. When you're in a park, you see a strange bird. How do you figure out what you're seeing? And I want to talk about that by a little bit of a sort of funnel method, thinking about the ways we can narrow down the bird that we're seeing when we're out watching birds or come across a bird. There are a few ways that we narrow down drastically the bird that we might be seeing, and that's the bird in a particular place, habitat, and time, right? Habitat is a particular kind of place with a particular kind of um, um, series of plants, particular kinds of animals, a certain amount of water, right, that attracts a certain kind of creature. So in a place, habitat, and a particular time, you're not going to see all 10,000 birds in the world. You might just see about 10 kinds of birds. Um, Within that place, habitat, and time, then there are a bunch of things that we think about, listen for, look for, that help us distinguish one bird from another. And we're going to go through this a little bit and look at some more of the birds that we can see in New York City that I imagine a lot of you are already familiar with or soon will be. Finally, when we've exhausted all other methods, there are certain particular little field marks that like I already talked about, an eye ring or an eyebrow stripe that might, if all else fails, help us distinguish one species from another. Okay, so we'll start with this top bar, location, habitat, and time of year. Location, right? All New York City dwellers know location is what it's all about. Um, and in birding, of course, location is critical. It helps simplify what birds we can see in a particular place like New York City. It also, though, makes birding uh, it's super exciting anywhere you go in the world. If you are not a birder, but you travel a lot and then you become a birder, you will spend a lot of time thinking, oh, all the birds I missed when we went to, when we went to Australia. Oh, because anywhere you go, if you're not a birder, you might just sort of casually notice a bird. But once you're into birds, you realize that there's a treasure trove of birds to see everywhere you go that are different from the birds you already know. If we're here in New York City or elsewhere in the on the eastern coast of North America, we might see a ruby-throated hummingbird or a Baltimore oriole, a red-tailed hawk, a great blue heron. If we go south, though, to Central or South America, we might see a ruby topaz hummingbird. We might see a toko toucan, swallow-tailed kite, also a little further north in Florida, or a roseate spoonbill. If we go to uh, Southern Europe or North Africa, we might see a sunbird. We might see a hoopoe, one of my favorite fabulous birds. We might see a beautiful lammergeier or griffin vulture of no, that's not the right name. Lammergeier of Europe, different kind of vulture that cracks animals' bones by dropping them from great height onto the rocks of the mountains where it lives. You might see flamingos, which, believe it or not, live and spend time in Southern Europe. A different kind lives here in the Americas. If you live or visit Asia, you might see the beautiful mandarin duck, bird that visited Central Park. Anybody out there who saw that bird a few years ago? You might see the azure-winged magpie or the crested ibis. This bird I just discovered, bizarre-looking Temminck's tragopan, displaying for its mate. And finally, speaking of displays, some of you have probably seen these birds. They're featured in a lot of films about nature. This is the Vogelkop superb bird of paradise that at breeding season, the male puts on this incredible sort of mind-bending show with its feathers. You might see sulfur-crested cockatoo if you visit Australia or New Zealand or the South Pacific, or a southern cassowary, a bird that can kill you with a kick. So keep your distance, uh, or a royal penguin. So, right, anywhere you go in the world, different birds, which makes birding and traveling endlessly exciting. It also means, though, that if we're in North America, right, things are a little simplified. There are only so many birds we can see. Related to that, within a certain place like New York City, there are a lot of different habitats. We have forests and marshes, we have open water and ponds. Um, and what birds you see depends on where you are. If you're out in Jamaica Bay or on the southern coast of Staten Island, you might see sandpipers, such as the American oystercatcher down below, or a flock of sandpipers above, right? These are birds that like open places, feed in shallow water. Um, if you're in Forest Park in Queens or Cortlandt Park in the Bronx, Central Park, you might see a beautiful hooded warbler, a woodland bird. Um, and so, it's when you're birding, you get to know the birds in a particular habitat, and that helps you to kind of predict almost. It's a little bit of a magic trick what birds you're going to see. It also can be confusing sometimes if you see a bird out of context. It's a little bit like seeing someone you know from work, say at a party or somewhere with your family. You might sort of do a double take and almost a hard and have a moment to recognize them because you're seeing them out of context. But generally, we see birds in an expected habitat, and there are only a certain number of birds we're going to see in a particular habitat in a certain place. Finally, among these top categories that narrow down what birds we might see, is this factor. This white-throated sparrow and this chipping sparrow both spend time in New York City, but they're here different times of year, right? So if you are here in the winter time, into mid-spring, you hear and see lots of white-throated sparrows. They spend the winter here, but come mid-May, most of them have gone north. They don't breed here. They fly north to Canada, to the northern states to nest. About that same time, chipping sparrows reappear. They spend the summer here, nesting off. They love cemeteries, open places with trees. And But by the fall, by the time that white-throated sparrows are showing up, chipping sparrows are heading south. So a birding day in the winter in Central Park, you may see a very different set of birds that you will see in than a birding day in the spring, summer, or fall. So that's something, again, that simplifies birding in a way, but it also makes it very exciting. It's something I think that you'll come to really appreciate as you get to know birds. I get too excited and knock out my own headphones. You'll come to appreciate that birds connect you to the seasons, right? We look forward to I'm looking forward to seeing the birds return now from all across North America. They're going to come through us here for just a few weeks, say hello, and they'll be gone again. And we'll wait to see them again in the spring. Okay, so these things, location, habitat, and time, help us reduce the possibilities of birds we might see, right? And I should say that some of the birding apps that many people use today, particularly eBird or Merlin, use this information to provide us with a very limited list of possible birds we might see. So that's a tool that we'll talk about that's very helpful as you get to know birds to limit the number of possibilities. Okay, right. So time of year, different season, different birds. So once we have that pool of birds that are in a particular place, time, and habitat, then we talk about all these other factors that help us tell one bird from another. All these things that we love about birds, right? Their song, their color, how they act. So let's talk a little bit about that. As you when you enter a park to look for birds, right? This is often what you encounter, particularly this time of year when the leaves are out. Um, and if you pause and are patient, you might hear someone um, doing their thing. This is one of my favorite bird songs. This is the wood thrush. And I use the wood thrush as an intro to the fact that the sounds of birds are one of the fundamental ways to get to know birds, to enjoy birds, even if you don't care which bird you're hearing, of course. But as you get to know birds, and if you want to become more skilled in identifying them, I can't overstate how helpful and for fun it is to get to know the sounds of birds around you. Because when you get to somewhere where you're birding, often if you know the bird sounds, you kind of know who's there before you even see a bird. So it's a little bit of a magic trick. It can feel a little bit like a secret skill that you know what's around you before you even see it. And for me, it's one of the main ways that I just love feeling connected to who's around me. Um, I walk into the park and I kind of feel, and here's where I'm corny again, but I kind of feel like, oh, there my buddies are here. I know who's here. I know these folks. And then when I hear a different bird, I'm like, who? Oh, hey, what? Hey, who's there? It makes birding and being in any natural space super exciting and interesting. And bird sounds, like human language, is complex enough that that's also something that you never stop learning. I should say that that is, of course, also one of, to me, the main appeals of birding or bird watching. By the way, that birding and bird watching mean the same thing. I think these days people think it's cooler to say birding, but I'm also a bird watcher. Um, uh, 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 so yeah, I mean, one of the wonderful things about birds is that, like many complex things you learn, musical skills, languages, all sorts of, any complex um, set of knowledge, there's always more to learn. I'm a person that loves to learn about all kinds of things, and I never get tired of learning. I'm always learning something new, even about birds that I know my whole life. Birds like the pigeon, the birds like the robin. I still find them interesting and fascinating. Okay, here's another bird song some of you might recognize. This is a very common bird in New York City during part of the year, and people say he says, "Oh, Canada, 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 Canada," because he's dreaming of flying north to Canada. In this case, it is usually a he. I think always a he singing. This is the white-throated sparrow. Beautiful, so lilting, plaintive. That is another sound, the white-throated sparrow. And that leads me to this next slide, where I'll talk a little bit about what kind of bird sounds we are going to get familiar with, right? I think all of you know, of course, that birds sing. It's one of the most spectacular things about them. Um, uh, Birds also have a whole bunch of sounds that we call calls that are not exactly a song. Bird songs are the domain of just a certain set of birds, songbirds, so that's easy to remember. That's one big interrelated group of birds, or order, we call it, of birds um, that are all related. They all have learned and evolved to sing, whereas other birds, ducks, falcons, ostriches, generally do not sing, though there are some exceptions. Some hummingbirds sing. Um, Songs generally, as we know, they have a melody. They tend to be kind of long and in phrases, like again, like people's songs. Birds sing mostly in spring, and mostly the males, usually in the morning and early evening, which is why those are the best times to go birding, though you can always find birds whenever you want to go look for birds. Um, and interestingly, songs by songbirds are both inherited and learned. Um, uh, this is similar to human language, right? We know that we inherit a certain capability to talk. We start to talk as soon as our mouths and vocal cords work. We start to mumble and, right, make little sounds. But we don't learn to speak our language unless our parents teach it, or somebody in our community teaches us the language. And this is the same with birds. We know from research, birds need to learn their particular song, and they need to learn it, songbirds do, by a particular age to learn it properly, the same way that people need to learn a language by a certain age to speak it flawlessly. Calls, on the other hand, are sounds that all birds make, not just songbirds, and they tend to be shorter, more succinct. You can hear them any time of the year, and they tend to have more distinct purposes and meanings. Different calls have different meanings, meaning I'm hungry, or feed me, or get out of here, or get over here. Calls have a whole bunch of different meanings. As a third bird we'll listen to, we have the American robin. This is a bird that has a few kinds of songs, as many birds do, similar but slightly different, and then a whole bunch of calls. And we're going to go through a recording of the robin, and I'll point out each one as we hear it. The robin is a great bird to start with if you want to get to know birdsong, because there are a lot of robins in New York City. And if you get to know those calls, you'll suddenly realize that there are robins all over the place all the time, and you didn't realize they were even there. It's, again, a little bit like learning a language. Those of you who've learned a foreign language, you know that when you learn a new word, you think, I've never heard that word in my life. And then suddenly you hear the word everywhere when people are speaking that language, and you realize you've heard it. You just didn't notice it before. And that is part of the glory of getting to know birds too, that you suddenly notice that there's life all around you all the time that you never noticed before. Let's listen to the robin. This is the typical song, little triplet notes. This is the kind of excited, hopped up on hormones dawn song. Birds wake up and want to sing. The whinny call, alarm, that's an aggravated robin. Also, that's a different aggravated robin. That, believe it or not, is a high-pitched warning that there's an aerial predator, like a hawk. And this is a very common call this time of year by young robins and migrating robins. As you can see, even a robin has all sorts of versatile, some very incredibly specific calls. Sometimes robins make that see when there's a plane flying over. But often when they do it, all the birds quiet down. And if you look carefully enough, you find there's a raptor sitting where, a bird of prey sitting somewhere. That tut-tut call, this past spring, I do a dawn birdsong sort of sit in Central Park, and we were listening to all the robins sing. A wood thrush started to sing, other birds started to sing, and suddenly we heard a robin go nuts, suddenly go beep beep tut 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 tut, crazy, and there was a flurry of noise, and then a barn owl came flying over us as we sat in Central Park. We all like sort of lost our minds that an owl, we thought, I thought, oh, that would be a dream if an owl came by at our dawn birdsong walk. But the robin alerted us to the owl. Anyway, back to the subject at hand. Okay, so bird song, right? Bird song is a major way that we can get to know which bird we're seeing. Here's another factor that's kind of obvious, right? This red-winged blackbird is a lot smaller than this osprey, right? So size helps us very quickly distinguish one species from another, have some idea what we're looking at, right? Size, though it's helpful, also you need to be careful, because size can be really hard to judge. This is a photo that I just found somewhere of a crow on the right. I'm pretty certain that's a crow by its shape. The bird on the left, though, I can't quite see it well enough, which is very often the case when you're bird watching. I can't quite see it well enough to tell what it is by its shape. And I can't tell how far away it is. Is that a bird that's about in the same plane as the crow, meaning, maybe a robin that's a little further away? Or is it a bird that's quite a bit further away, like a sharp-shinned hawk? I can't really tell for sure in this photo because I just can't see it quite well enough to distinguish the shape, which helps me figure out which kind of bird it is. And so it's a very common error by birders of all skill levels to see a bird quickly and jump to a conclusion and then have to eat crow because they realize that they are way off. I have made the worst calls in my life, calling like a starling, little tiny bird, a vulture, when I saw it at a distance and didn't look very carefully, and then suddenly realized, oh, that bird is actually like half a mile further away than I thought. I just saw the shape. And so that's a common error while birding. Um, I should say one good story about this. Don Reapy, one of my dear friend, who's a longtime bird advocate in Jamaica Bay, head of the American Little Society there for many years. He Don tells this story of being at a hawk watch when everybody's looking for these migrating hawks coming in, sometimes at eye level, but hawk watchers have these just incredible skill from watching so many birds. They can spot a bird and identify it far away before most people have even noticed there's a bird there. And Don was watching, saw a little glimpse in his binoculars, and said, okay, over peak two, there's a red-tailed hawk, and people are like, where? And he's like, okay, well, it's moving along. Now it's at peak one, red-tailed hawk. See? And everyone's like, where, Don? And he's like, okay, well, let me see. I'll find it again. He looks and he goes, oh. And he realized that he was seeing a monarch butterfly. He'd seen the color and sort of extrapolated from it, as birders all do, to thinking he had a red-tailed hawk when he actually had a butterfly. And so that's an example of the kind of ridiculous calls that everybody makes sometimes, because size is not dependable if you don't have a good frame of reference for how big something is. How far away is that bird? Okay, size is also not just about the full size of the bird, also about proportion, the size of different body parts. So in this case, these two woodpeckers, the downy and the hairy woodpecker, the hairy woodpecker on the right is bigger, but also it has a bigger head and a bigger beak, right? And so when you see a downy woodpecker with this dainty little bill, and then you see a hairy, I've known from seeing so many downies, when I see a hairy, I go, whoa, what a big beak, what a big head. It kind of hits me. And that sort of entails you knowing the birds, but also if you're trying to figure it out, you'll learn that many species are distinguishable by the proportion of their beak size, their head size relative to related birds. Um, right? Also, just point out that with the woodpeckers, as most woodpeckers, the male is a little more colorful than the female. And in both of these species, the male has a red patch. This is a male downy and a female hairy. So it's not the perfect comparison, right? If it were two males, they both have that red patch. But the red patch itself doesn't help you distinguish the species. Okay, so we have song, we have uh, size. Here's something that's super important to help you become a sharper birder and clear about what you're seeing. These are two very different birds, the great blue heron and the white-breasted nuthatch. They're actually, though, very similar in color, right? They're have almost identical distributions of color, this blue-gray and the black on the head, the kind of rusty here, which is also underneath the flank on the great blue heron. But there's something that's very different about them. Also, the white-breasted nuthatch is smaller, but here I've kind of eliminated that difference. We're seeing the nuthatch up close. They have, of course, right, a very different shape, right? The long, lithe great blue heron versus the little stub of a bird of the nuthatch, right? No neck. And the shape of a bird between a heron and a nuthatch is not always that extreme, but the shape is, I think, next to song, probably the most important thing to focus on as you're getting to know birds. This is a drawing from the field guide that I used as a kid, the Peterson guide. I now use a different guide and talk about that in a few minutes. But this is still a great guide. And one of the great assets of this guide were these silhouettes. And I can't tell you how helpful it was to me as a kid, and I recommend you do it, is to find these silhouettes, get the guide, and practice, test yourself on learning these silhouettes, right? I can go through this, and some of you probably can too, to know maybe not the exact species, but recognize maybe here that this might be a dove, right? This might be is that a blue jay or a cardinal? Oh, that's a blue jay, maybe, and that's a cardinal, right? Um, you might recognize swallows here or a kingfisher if you know that bird, right? I have come, and all birders come from spending time watching birds in nature to recognize these shapes, because often what you see actually is the shape, not so much the color. You see birds against the light, and so shape is something you want to always focus on. Let's look at two actual birds and compare their shape. This is the mockingbird we looked at before. This is a different bird, a sandpiper. Um, please chime in on the chat again, if you will. What are the differences in shape you see between these two birds? We can see that actually they have very similar colors, right? They're kind of like tannish, brownish birds with white patches in the wings, a little bit of white near the tail. What differences do you see in their shape? Good, right. Leg size, right? The willet has long legs, and those are actually its ankles, by the way, but believe it or not. Its knees you can't even see. That's the if you see the way it bends, that's its ankle. The whole thing at the bottom is the foot, which is another weird thing about birds. Um, uh, oh yeah, good. Right. Their flight feathers are arranged differently in a different shape to the wing. Right. The willet is more slender, as Emma says, a long neck and also a long bill, as Audrey mentions. Right. Mockingbird has a shorter neck and a tighter bill. As Valetti mentions, right? Yeah, the willet has kind of a small head compared to its body. Right, and good. Victoria mentions the tail length and the width, right? The mockingbird has a long tail. It's splayed, though it can be narrow. So we want birds can control their feathers. Yeah, good. The angle they hold their wings at, right? All of these things help us distinguish this sort of similar looking bird superficially from this bird, right? And once you still focus on those things, right, they look entirely different, right? Good, great. Speaking of birds moving their feathers, I'm just going to return for a second to this opening slide, right? Some birds have crests, and birds that have crests, there are not that many, so it's helpful. You start to recognize them pretty quickly by that shape. I'll also point out, though, that of course birds can control their feathers, right? We can't choose to have a mohawk tonight, right? That would be cool, but we don't have that capability unless we use stuff well, I'm gonna mess up my hair, unless we use stuff to do it. Birds can say, hey, or fluff up their back feathers. Birds can control their different patterns or tracts we call of feathers. And that includes the crest, right? You can see that this cardinal has its crest down. This female has the crest up, right? The blue jay has its crest down. And sometimes it's really hard to even see the crest. Um, Also, specific to the shape of the bird, we talked earlier about how important the head is, the shape of the bill. The shape of the beak tells you what kind of bird you're seeing, and it also tells you a lot about the bird. Birds like sparrows and finches eat seeds. They have thick, strong bills to crush seeds. They also can really bite if you catch one. Um, Birds like thrushes and warblers that eat fruit and bugs have a more delicate, thinner bill. Birds that just eat bugs can have a couple patterns. They can have a little bill like a swallow, but have a big mouth that they open, kind of like a whale as they fly through the sky. They can have a bill with a little hook on it, like this great crested flycatcher that catches a bigger bug and holds onto it. And the extreme of that is a bird like a bald eagle, right? A predator, which you want to stay away from that head if you're ever near a bald eagle, right? Because that beak can capture prey and the prey can't get away. let's look at a few bird shapes. To get to know these kinds of birds, I've chosen purposefully a bunch of frustratingly drab brown birds of different kinds, right? So we're just going to go through these and they may return before we end here to just get to know a little bit the shape of these birds, the kind of beak they have, the general shape. Up here on the left, see if you know generally what kind of bird this is. We have a bird with a thick bill for eating seeds. That's a sparrow, in this case, a song sparrow. Up here on the right, we have a bird with a big eye and a thinner bill, kind of a pear shape, like a robin. This is a thrush, a relative of the robin. Then we have a bird that's kind of shaped like a mockingbird, thin, long tail, a little bit curved bill. This is the thrasher related to the mockingbird, another bird that imitates other birds' songs. So we have a sparrow, a thrush, and a thrasher. Just three more. We have a little guy with a sharp little bill, a little stubby tail, and a sharp personality. That's a wren. We have a bird to its right that sits on a perch with a little bit of a crest, flies out, catches a fly, and flies back to the same perch, flycatcher. Then we have a little bird with a thin bill and a kind of round head, a kind of like typical bird shape. This is a warbler, right? Thin bill versus a sparrow with a thick bill. Okay, so I'm going to get back to those guys, but it's to help you get to familiar with the idea of really paying attention to the shape of the bird. Something that's related to shape is how a bird moves. This is the behavior of the bird. This is a flycatcher sitting on a perch called an eastern phoebe. If you see a phoebe, you immediately will see that it does something particular. It bobs its tail. It also says its name. Phoebe? Phoebe. But that tail bob, certain birds bob their tails. And if you see that and you get to know that, oh, that's got to be a phoebe versus a whole bunch of other possibilities, including the peewee, another bird that very cutely says its name, but does not bob its tail. Here's our robin again. The way birds move, right, is very particular to a species. You can see this robin is taking a few steps. It's stopping to listen for worms under the soil and then triangulating and going for it. And you can see it's pretty good at it, right? Robins move in a particular way. They hop a few steps and stop, listen, and then go for a worm. Oop, missed it that time. That's different than, say, these birds. Grackles, named after their sound. Grackles Grackle's a little nervous, I think, because of the camera, but they kind of, there's a song sparrow. Grackles kind of march around like cowboys, pecking for food, right? They move differently than robins do. They also travel in a flock, which some birds do and some birds don't. Robins do part of the year, but not the whole year. Good. Okay, so in our whirlwind tour, we've talked about bird song. We've talked about size, shape, behavior. Here's the last big item, which is sort of so obvious. Can't believe we haven't mentioned it. Between these two sort of similarly shaped birds, right? There's a very obvious difference that attracts us to birds, right? They're very colorful. And this cardinal is a very different color than this blue jay, right? Also, though, you can see that they're a different pattern, right? And that helps us when we can't see the color that well. We can see that we're seeing a solidly colored bird of a cardinal, but we're seeing the blue jay. You can see that it's dark above and light below. So the pattern as well as the color helps us tell what kind of bird we're seeing. And color is not just restricted to the feathers, it's also in the other body parts. So some of you might know these guys. These are some of the most fabulous birds we have in New York City. This is the great egret and its smaller cousin, the snowy egret. The great egret has a big yellow honker of a beak and a little bit of green you can see during breeding season here on its skin, and black feet and legs. The snowy egret has a black bill, thinner, with a yellow by the eye and yellow feet. So it has the same colors mostly, but in different order. And once you get to know that order, you always know among these species which one you're seeing. Okay, that brings us down through this narrowing down that helps us know one bird from another to the final little finishing off category of field marks. These are on this yellow-rumped warbler, all these little dribs and drabs of color that I was talking about earlier on, like an eye ring. In this case, this bird has a partial eye ring, not all the way around. It has a mask. It has wing bars. It has a yellow rump. People call them butterbutts. Right? It has an eyebrow stripe, a light eyebrow stripe. There are two field marks that you hear a lot about, and you also want to look for when you're trying to distinguish two similar birds. One is the eyebrow stripe on this Carolina wren versus the house wren, right? You can see this guy has a really strong eyebrow stripe. And you might not be able to see the color that well, but if you see the stripe, you know you're more likely to have that bird. Then we see again the mockingbird that we were looking at on the right, right? It's similar to the catbird, but you can see there's some differences, right? The mockingbird has an eye line. Catbird does not. Catbird has a cap. The mockingbird has wing bars. The catbird does not, right? So eye ring, eye line, and wing bar are three basic field marks that you're always looking for often when you're looking at a new bird, as well as the shape and the beak size. Okay. That ends this portion of the webinar. We have a few more things to talk about. There are just a few cool complications to this system I wanted to mention, which you probably already know about. This snowy owl is mentioning there are some complications. One is this. This is, again, a complication that makes birding fun. This bird and this bird are the same bird. This scarlet tanager molts or changes its feathers that it has in the spring and breeding season. And when it visits us, I guess, in the fall, and they're going to be coming through very soon, if not already, it looks different. It looks more like the female. The male often molts to look more like the female during the non-breeding season. It doesn't need to advertise its presence to all predators when it's not trying to impress the female. So time of year makes birds look different, which makes birding more fun. Different season, different feathers. Finally, we've talked about the cardinal here in the middle. That's the female and the male. Some of you might recognize the other two birds. This is the house finch. In both of these birds, the female looks different than the male, right? This is what we call a sexually dimorphic species, dimorphic, two forms. The male and the female look different. And there are many birds where that's the case. There also are birds where ladies and gentlemen do not look different. The blue jay, the great egret, or the black-crowned night heron look the same to us. I'll just say very quickly, something very cool about birds, though, is that birds see in ultraviolet light. They see colors that we do not perceive and can't even imagine. And we know that a male blue jay and many other birds where the male and the female look the same to us, the male blue jay reflects ultraviolet light differently than the female. So that means that they look different to one another, but we can't see it. It's invisible. We can't even imagine what colors they are, which is, well, just wild, right? For us, for our purposes, though, it simplifies things because many species look the same. Okay, let's see those birds again before we get to talking about getting out and birding as we finish up. See if you can come up with the names of some of these birds. In the upper left, we have a bird with a thick bill for crunching seeds, a sparrow. To its right, we have a bird kind of shaped like a robin with a thin bill, a thrush. Below, we have a lithe bird, kind of a wisecracker with a long tail and a curved bill. This is a thrasher related to the mockingbird. Sparrow, thrush, thrasher. We have a little bird up on the left with a thin bill and a sharp tail and a sharp personality. That's a wren, always mad about something. We have a bird to its right sitting flying out to grab a fly and flying back, often with a crest, a flycatcher. And then we have a little cute bird with a thin bill, sort of sparrow-like, but with a thin bill, often very colorful. This is a warbler. Okay. All right. So happily, although I love all those brown drab birds, there are many beautiful birds to see in New York City. So let's talk about getting out and birding here. There are, just to give you a little inspiration, there are so many cool birds to see in New York City year round. We have red-tailed hawks that nest here. There are young red-tailed hawks all over the city. We have bald eagles and peregrine falcons nesting in New York City now, which is an amazing, by the way, conservation story for another time. Look it up. We have egrets and herons nesting on islands right in New York City. These are snowy and great egret chicks and adults. This is the black-crowned night heron, a bird that we've been focusing on a great deal because they're endangered and declining in New York City. Black-crowned night heron babies, by the way, are hilarious, scary as heck, but completely helpless. They hiss at you like a little dinosaur when you get too close to them. Some of you might know that the great egret is a bird that nearly went extinct and actually is the cause of all Audubon societies to form. Do people know why the great egret almost went extinct? This lady is the cause. People used to love create crazy feather arrangements and even whole birds on their hats in the late 1800s, and birds almost went extinct from hunting. Audubon societies were formed to protect these birds and led to the Migratory Bird Treaty Act that has protected birds for over a century. These birds have returned over the past 40 years to live in New York City on islands all across the harbor. We also have just so many beautiful, colorful songbirds and flycatchers that visit New York City, and you're going to get to know all of these guys. They all come through here during migration, as well as many kinds of beautiful warblers, which are sort of the birds that make the birders go craziest during migration. So many different species, up to 30 or more species, if you're really lucky, you can see in New York City. Okay. Just a few more minutes here. I always go long. I'm working on cutting this thing down, but there's so much to talk about. If you hold on with me for just a few more minutes, I just want to talk about some useful tools. You don't need anything to enjoy birds. You can just enjoy birds on your own, but a few things, including binoculars and a field guide, can be really helpful. If you don't have binoculars, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what to think about. And I'll just say that all this information is also on our website at some links that I'm going to provide. So you don't need to scribble things down, but just to kind of get some thoughts in your head about it. Binoculars go by two numbers here, 8x42 or 7x35. The first number is how magnified it is. You're seeing it 7 or 8 times bigger than it actually is. And the second number is how big the lens is, basically how big the binoculars are. For a birding pair of binoculars, 8x40 or 8x42 or 7x40 is the good range. You might think more powerful, like a 10 or a 12 binocular would be even better, but it gets a little hard to keep the image still, and it can be a little hard to find the bird because you're so focused on it. So look for binoculars in this range. And as you're getting to know birds, don't be shy. Try other people's binoculars. People are generally happy to let you try them. As I mentioned, get a full-sized pair, which is that second number, not 20, but something more like 40. You want to get lenses that are coated to get as much light as possible to your eyes. And I don't mean to be flip about it. We all worry about money, but the more you pay for binoculars, the better they are. And they can be a really long-term investment. I have binoculars that I've had. I have my father's binoculars that I inherited that are about 25 years old, still great. I recommend, I don't get a kickback, B&H Photo on 34th Street, great place to try binoculars. And when you try them, think about how comfortable they are for you. If you wear glasses, make sure there's an easy way to get the eye cups down to be right against your glasses, that they fit your face right, and that you can easily focus them as you're looking through them. A field guide is an old-fashioned kind of thing. This is the Peterson field guide that we have. This is the old field guide that I used to love. You might think that, you don't need a book anymore, you have your app, but in the field, I find that it's very useful to be able to, sorry, to compare birds in a field guide. This is the Sibley guide. This is actually the Western Sibley guide. And it's good to get off your phone. All this information is on our website. Make sure if you get a Sibley guide, you get the right one. You want, this is fuzzing out, you want the East guide, not the full guide that's for the whole country, which is bigger. You want the Eastern North America guide, which will fit in your cargo pants, which is, of course, a very fashionable choice and one that's very useful when you're bird watching. There are also lots of other great options here, also in Spanish. There are lots of other great apps online, great websites, which Tasha, thank you for just putting in our birding resources page, which has lots of great information, including a lot of this gear stuff that I'm talking about. Also, every birding guide has an app for your phone, which is very useful. It includes bird sounds. And a particularly useful app is eBird, which is both a website and an app. eBird and Merlin. I bet some of you know Merlin. Merlin is a teaching tool of eBird that helps to identify birds and actually can identify birds by sound, which a lot of starting birders now use to help orient them. And it's an amazing tool to sort of connect you directly with nature if you're not on a bird walk. eBird is also a way to keep track of your bird sightings, an amazing conservation tool that keeps track of birds all across the earth. I keep all my bird sightings in eBird. As we finish up, I just want to say thanks to the photographers who've donated their work to the presentation. I'm going to torture you one more time with these birds. Who do we have here? We have in the upper left, we have a bird that eats seeds with a thick bill. We have a song sparrow. To its right, we have a kind of pear-shaped bird with a thinner bill, like a robin, a thrush. We have a lithe bird with a curved bill and a long tail, a thrasher, same shape as a mockingbird. We have a little bird with a lot of personality and a thin bill and a stubby tail in the upper left, a wren. We have a bird to its right that sits on a perch, flies out, and comes back. Doesn't hop around. A flycatcher, in this case, a flycatcher called a peewee that we heard. And we have below a little bird with a thin little bill, often very colorful, a warbler. Finally, come out birding. You don't have to come birding with us. There are lots of great groups that bird in New York City, and you can find those on our website. But you happen to be on this webinar just when fall migration is starting, and we've just gotten all our fall events on the website. All the events are up on the website now, and member registration is open. So that gives you a discount on trips. Non-member registration opens Thursday, but you may discover that it's worth it to become a member to get the discount and get early registration. We have free intro to birding outings, some of which I'm leading, some of which are led by my many skilled bird guide colleagues across the city throughout the fall. And I also teach a more intensive beginning birding course that starts in October. I'd love to have you join the course. It's a really fun